Here we are. This is cryptography, and let me tell you what I'm planning to do. There we go. All right, so I'm going to talk about Diffie Hellman and then demonstrate two new projects, which I'm very pleased to have here. I've gotten very impressed with zero-knowledge proofs. So I added projects in ZK snarks and elliptic curve Diffie Hellman signatures and Schnorr signatures, which are now available on the Bitcoin blockchain since the Taproot upgrade last weekend. All right, so I'll do as much of that as I can. If this coughing gets too bad, I may have to put the demos off till next week. Anyway, let's start with Diffie Hellman. The point of Whitfield Diffie and Martin Hellman in 1976 reinvented a top-secret NSA cryptographic protocol, which, from the stories I've read, had been used for 20 years by the United States government to make unbreakable top-secret cryptography, and they concealed it. And they were not happy when mathematicians reinvented it on the outside, but in a way that's inevitable. So they published it, and this was a revolution. I was excited, like many other people, when it became clear. I read the Scientific American paper in 1979 that exposed this, and I immediately tried to program it, but I was using an 8-bit processor, and I really couldn't accomplish anything much. And I spared myself a ton of pain that way because Phil Zimmerman used a 16-bit processor, and he programmed it, and he released it, and then for about 10 years, the U.S. government tried to lock him up and sue him and punish him for releasing what they regarded as proprietary, dangerous technology to our enemies by putting it on the public internet. So I didn't have to do that because I was not a good enough programmer. At the time, I was idealistic enough to think everybody should have this. Everybody should be able to hide anything they want from the government. That will lead to utopia. Now I'm not so sure of that either. But that's how public key encryption works. And here's the point. You're going to have two people agree on a shared secret without ever directly sending that secret over the untrusted channel. That's the idea. So it relies on this hard problem, the factoring problem again. So you work on a group, the numbers 1 to p minus 1, where p is prime. And now the two parties just choose random elements, A and B, that do not have to be prime. They're just random numbers in this group. They also use the number G, which is not secret. So now G is well known. So you pick a random A and calculate G to the A, mod P, and send that over the wire. The other person does the same thing, picks a private key B and transmits G to the B, mod P, over the wire. And now you each take your private key and multiply it by the other person's public key, and now you end up with the same shared secret. That's how it works. So now you have a shared secret. Now the shared secret is not necessarily evenly distributed to among a certain number of bits like you want it to be, so you shouldn't just use it immediately as a key. You should run it through a key derivation function like PBKDF2, which we've talked about and done in the projects, and then you've got a key. So you have negotiated a key, but what you've sent over the wire is not the private key or anything connected directly to the private key. So, all right, it turns out that you have to be a little bit careful choosing P and G. All these things based on factoring, like this and RSA, turned out to be a little more complicated than people first imagined, and where you had to carefully choose the values, or you might end up with cases that were fairly easy to solve. If your P minus 1 over 2 is not prime, then the actual number of available points here might be less than you think, and it might even be the product of many primes, and one of those primes might be really small, like 2 or 5 or 11, and then you'll be able to factor the primes faster. So, that's why there are things called safe primes, which will not be the product of many primes, but the product of only 2, and therefore none of them too small. All right. So anyway, safe primes are therefore slow to generate. You have to guess until you find a prime, which will take like 1,000 guesses, and then you have to guess among them another 1,000 times to find one where the other number is also prime. So it can be pretty slow. To generate a Diffie Hellman key, 2048 bits long, took about 4 minutes here, 150 seconds. What's that? That's 2.5 minutes. And to generate RSA 2048 takes less than a second. So it's quite a lot of work to generate a safe prime. All right. Anyway, so now we can talk about how secure it is from a mathematical point of view. So your public value is g to the a, and your secret value is a. So this is the fundamental issue. Can you recover a private key from a public key? And that is the digital logarithm problem, recovering a from g to the a mod p. So the question is, how hard is the discrete logarithm problem? All right. So that's one issue. It would be determining a from g to a. If you could solve the discrete logarithm problem, then you could crack Diffie Hellman. But I don't know. This coughing is not getting better. Anyway, the computational Diffie Hellman problem, though, is what you really need. And that's not really, if you have g to the a and g to the b, can you find g to the ab? In principle, there might be a way to do that without finding a and b. And that would be, just like I was saying in the news, there might be a faster way to get what you need here than solving the DLP. So the real security of Diffie Hellman depends on the difficulty of this problem, the computational Diffie Hellman problem, which might be easier than the discrete logarithm problem. Anyway, the best technique currently known is a number sieve, the same way you factor numbers, and it turns out that it gives you 90 bits of security of 2048-bit prime. It'll be like 2 to the 90 calculations. So that's the game. Right now, it looks pretty secure. And as we've said many times, if quantum computers actually improve their technology to where they work well, they will blow all this stuff away. So there's the decisional Diffie Hellman problem, which is another issue. Suppose that you could not totally find g to the ab, but you could find part of g to the ab, like the first 32 bits of g to the ab. That would still weaken it, and that would not be good. So what you'd like is the final number to be not related to either of these in any simple way at all. And that you can mathematically express simply that this is completely random and every bit in it is unconnected to the values of these underlying public keys. So that's the decisional Diffie Hellman problem. And that's why we talked about this before. You want your cryptography to create random looking output. So the ciphertext just appears to be random bits, so it doesn't contain any patterns which leak information about the inputs. All right, so if the decisional Diffie Hellman problem is hard, then the other problems are also hard. And this is the prime assumption in cryptography. Many people have studied it, and they have decided the current belief is that both of these are hard if you choose the parameters carefully. And all of our current transactions on the internet are essentially performed using these systems. All of TLS, which we'll get to. All right. All right. So, there's key agreement protocols, and we can talk about other ones. There are other ones that are used besides Diffie Hellman. 3G and 4G use authenticated key agreement. So, you've got a pre-shared secret, K, and you're going to, each of you know a secret. So one side picks a random number R, and then they calculate a pseudo-random function of key R, and a second pseudo-random function of it. And so this is going to be the secret key, is going to be pseudo-random function 0 of KR. Then they send R and a second pseudo-random function up here. Now this person now has R. They combine it with K and use pseudo-random function 0 to create the secret key. And they can tell that it really came from this person because the V1 proves that they have possession of the key. Now this is not a symmetric system. The idea is that you have a SIM card in a weak cell phone and an operator in a strong computer running the the cellular network. And so this does all the work. It picks up the random function. All you do is verify that this really came from a real tower by proving that they have the private key. And so that is how the SIM card knows the seed for the key came from a trusted source. And then the SIM card sends another V2 back to prove to the cell tower that it also has possession of the private key. So this is a different system than Diffie Hellman, but you notice it does, for the same reason, avoid sending plaintext keys over the untrusted channel. The problem is you can perform a replay attack. You can just record an old R and V1 and impersonate the operator and fool the SIM card. So the only way to prevent that would be to somehow check to make sure R has not been reused. All right, another thing is if somebody gets the private key, the shared secret key, then they can perform a man-in-the-middle attack and listen on anything and impersonate anybody. Then the whole thing is completely shattered. This is the problem with lack of forward secrecy. It doesn't use a different key for each session. It uses the same key over and over and over. So if it gets compromised, people can get in, which is what the United States government is doing in Utah, archiving all the internet data for years, hoping they can eventually steal the keys later and decrypt it later. All right, so here's various attack models. The eavesdropper is what we talk about most. A person can be listening passively, but if they're a man in the middle, they can record, modify, drop, or inject messages. And so you must not leak any information about the shared secret. If the attacker gets the session key and all temporary secrets, but not the long-term secret, that's a data leak. And a breach is if they learn the long-term secret K. And you can decide how much harm these various flaws do to the transmissions. So if you have mutual authentication, each party authenticates, which is nice, so you know who they are. Key control means neither party can control the final shared secret, which Diffie Hellman has, but 3G and 4G don't. The cell tower totally controls it. And forward secrecy is where you use a different key for every session, so that even if all the secrets are stolen from one session, that doesn't give you the ability to decrypt a different session. And 3G, 4G doesn't provide that either. Another measure is the performance. How many exchanges go past? That's usually the most important thing, because usually it's latency on the line is the big problem, not processing time. And you can also consider the computation power involved. All right, so all right, so 3G is fast, and you can pre-calculate it, but it doesn't have some of those other desirable properties. All right, so now we talk about Diffie Hellman protocols. Here's original anonymous Diffie Hellman. It is not authenticated. It's just what we described. Alice picks a private key and a public key, and Bob picks a private key and a public key. They just send the public keys. It works, but they haven't authenticated themselves at all. There's no pre-shared secret or anything, so an attacker in the middle can completely defeat it. Alice sends her public key to the attacker. The attacker makes a different public key and sends that to Bob. Then Bob sends a public key. The attacker makes a different public key and sends that to Alice. Now Alice thinks she's talking to Bob, but she's really talking to Eve, and Eve can see everything she says. Bob thinks he's talking to Alice, but he's really talking to Eve. Neither of them can detect that this has happened, and they're both handing off all their secret data to a person in the middle. So that's bad. The lack of any kind of authentication has made it so they can't really tell who they're talking to. So what you have to do is somehow authenticate the people. And you could do it with RSA signatures. So you pick a random A and then you sign it. You have a public key and you sign it, so you prove who you are. And Bob sends a public key and signs it. And now you have the signature, which means essentially you have a trusted third party which holds the signature's public keys, like the Internet Key Exchange, or the there's the thing that holds the private keys for TLS. So then that prevents the attacker in the middle from being able to fool anybody. Is it like adding another layer on Diffie Hellman? Well, yeah, it's adding more to Diffie Hellman. It's not exactly a layer, but it's a separate authentication. This is how TLS works. You communicate with, if you sign into Google, you send some handshakes to Google to connect, and then Google sends you a key, and then before you believe it, you go ask a trusted third party, the certificate authority, is that really the right key? That's what's going on here. So the only solution to a man-in-the-middle attack is either a pre-shared secret or a trusted third party. There has to be somebody else to verify who you're talking to. All right. And so that stops eavesdroppers. The attacker can't learn the shared secret. All right. All right. So the attacker could try to replay. And if they did, they could remember this old stuff and replay it. And then if they did, they could fool Bob into sending some data thinking they're talking to Alice, but they wouldn't be able to reply to any messages because they don't really have the shared secret key. So they could get a few parts of handshakes going by, but they wouldn't actually be able to forge any traffic. And they wouldn't be able to read or create any traffic. They don't really have it. So if you, after you make the connection, you then test it by sending through something to see if it goes through, you can prevent that. And even if you don't prevent it, that person in the middle can't really do too much harm. They can't really get to where they can decrypt any messages. All right. And so now if you consider data leaks, if Eve gets one of the private keys, then she can impersonate Alice. So if you also incorporate long-term keys into the shared secret calculation, where there is a verify abortive signature is invalid, integrate long-term keys. I don't quite understand how the long-term keys get in here. But anyway, that's some way to deal with this situation. What is meant by long-term keys? I think it's a shared secret, but now I'm confused, actually. Signature A using pub A. Bob has a private B and a public A, yeah. And now he picks a random exponent B. That's Bob's private key. I don't understand this one. All right, I thought I understood it, but I don't see it in the figure and I don't understand it. If any of you students figure it out, let me know. Actually, it doesn't seem any different than the last one to me. I must be missing something. Send A in a signature, send B in a signature. An impersonation attack. Well, I don't know. All right, let me take a look in the book. See, maybe I got the wrong figure or something. Security against data leaks. There. Now, it is the picture, but I cannot understand the picture. Exponents A and B are the short-term secrets. If Eve is able to learn the value at exponent along with matching values, she can initiate a new execution. Okay. One way to make it secure is to integrate long-term keys. They're not in the picture. Okay, they don't explain it at all. That's why I'm not understanding the explanation. You'd have to I think you basically have to have a shared secret K is what they're talking about. Some kind of long-term key. They don't explain what this long-term key is, and it's not in the figure. I'm guessing a sufficient way to do it would be to have a pre-shared key, K, on both ends. Then you're going to have to imagine that somehow didn't get stolen. This one I don't really get. All right. Anyway, so there is a better solution, which was the NSA approved for their most critical assets, called MQV. And this is considered very good. And what it does is you have long-term public keys and long-term private keys. So you have Alice has a private key and a public key, and Bob has a private key and a public key from Alice. And then they pick another exponent, and then they mix all those things together to calculate it. And this is considered to be the most secure and resists all these attacks. Even if they can steal the ephemeral secrets, they can't find the shared secret because it includes those long-term private keys. And even if they breach and get a long-term private key, it has forward secrecy because you use a different ephemeral key every time. So anyway, it's considered very secure, but nobody ever bothers using it because it's complicated. It's complicated to set up. It was covered by patents. What most people use is authenticated Diffie Hellman with the public keys and the signatures. Or they even use unauthenticated Diffie Hellman, which is actually used quite a lot on the internet, even though it is not considered safe. And I think it's beginning to be abandoned. Now, something I mentioned before, the shared secret is not really what it should be for something like a AES key. It's not the right length. It's not really random enough. So what you ought to do is treat it like a password, where you run it through a PBKDF2 function to turn it into a really properly formed private key. And as I mentioned, there are old cyber suits that actually use Diffie Hellman Anonymous. Several of them still available. Could I possibly go over DLP side 15 to 17? All right, let's go see what 15 to 17 is. All right. Yep. So you pick a secret value, A, you calculate G to the A mod P, and you send that over the untrusted network. That is the discrete logarithm problem. And that is the fundamental problem that is considered hard, that must be hard. So, all right. And so the attacker sees only the public keys, and they want the private keys. They need to get at least one private key, and they can't get either of them because they cannot turn G to the A into A, and they can't turn G to the B into B. That is the fundamental hard problem that makes Diffie Hellman work. And the computational problem is, in principle, you could imagine that there's a way to take the two public keys and somehow combine them to generate this number without knowing A or B. And you also want that to be impossible. Okay? All right. Anyway, right, but G, A times G to the B, yes, that's correct, yes. G to the A times D to the B. No, G to the A times G to the B is G to the A plus B. Yes, but what you need is G to the A times B. So let's go up here, something like 12 or 15. Okay. Yeah. There. The shared secret is, yeah, what you do is he takes this person's public key, which is G to the A, and takes it to the power B to get the private keys. And this person takes their private key and takes the public key of the other person to that power. Multiplying these two together is different. It's the difference between G to the A plus B and G to the A times B. Very good. A very good question. Yep, people have got it. Yes. Well, if you just multiply two public keys, you get G to the A plus B, which is not what you need. You need G to the AB. And you can't do that without knowing A or B. Good. You folks have got it. All right, so we talked about this. All right. And the other problem is there are some unsafe primes, as you mentioned before. So if you choose a prime unwisely, then under certain circumstances, the shared secret is in fact in a small loop, like those hash functions, where it doesn't have as many values as you think it has, and that weakens it. So they fixed that quite recently, though, only 5 years ago. All right, let's take a look at these cahoots, which I have over here. This is chapter 11. What is this nonsense? They're getting pushier and pushier about trying to get me to pay. Chapter 11. There we go. And what is this garbage? Okay. guess. All right. Well, there won't be much competition with only 3. Nevertheless, we shall proceed. All right, so what modulus should be used in Diffie Hellman? Yep, you got to use a safe prime, or it can turn out that your public key is easy to guess. Which one is the fast attack on Diffie Hellman? Okay, that's the number sieve. The same way you factor the number into its component primes. And what property mitigates against man-in-the-middle attacks? Yep, authentication. If you know who you're talking to, then the person in the middle can't fool you. All right. And what's the most secure but rarely used system? MQV, like so many things, it was too late and too difficult to set up, and the difference was not large enough to motivate people to move from the older system. All right. All right. All right. So we stop there.